Hey, Christine, welcome to the show.
Thanks so much for having me, Rachel.
I'm excited to chat. So, why don't you start off, just tell us a little bit about you and what you do?
So I own a business called Ripple Effects. I specialize in teaching people how to be intentional networkers and community builders.
All right, how did it start? How did you get there?
So it's something that's been 4 years in the making. Um, I've made, quite a few career transitions in my life and trying to transition into a new industry where not only do you have to start over, but you're being taught old ways and, oh, hey, you should sell this way, you should sell that way. And I never was okay with that. I was in the car business, being in advertising, being in finance, and they all have a certain way of doing things. And I never went along with any of those things because I didn't feel it was a good way of building a business. So I wanted to, my goal was to be a resource at the end of the day. How do I be a resource? How do I get in front of people in the most non-confrontational way possible? So they actually listen to me as a person, not make assumptions based on the job title that I have or the company that I work for. So that's kind of where that started. I started doing events. I started really advocacy through the community in women-owned businesses and promoting education and just different avenues with other experts and saying, hey, you should go to this person for, for this particular thing or that particular thing. And then it turned into, I started teaching other people how to be better networkers because it led to them connecting me to better people. And I was like, okay, there's got to be something to this. If they're going to connect me to better quality connections, and then I got more qualified clients, I'm like, so my, building my business model should really be through other people, not, oh, well, I'm just going to cold call 50 people a day or send 50 random emails. And like, that's not a very good use of my time. And the law of numbers is still not good in
For
that.
sure. For
I'm
sure.
like, I don't waste my time with me like, well, hopefully I get 1% that will respond back. How do I get better with that 1%? I'm like, no, that just sounds terrible. Like, why not be at like 50%, or
Yeah.
70%? So that's where it started there. And then I started doing networking workshops, and I just had a lot of people coming to me. They're like, everybody, teach me how to do that, or, help me connect to this person. And it led to where we're at now, building a business. I never thought I could monetize on networking in this way. And, not just, oh, hey, I'm making all this money, that's it. It's, I'm actually helping people be better at building their own business
Yeah.
and doing it faster and
Yeah.
more efficiently. And people are excited to come to the table and network finally, which is so awesome to have people be like, oh my God, I'm so excited. I can't wait to go to my group this week, or I can't wait to learn how to do this, or I can't wait to do this or do that. And there's almost like this whole reinvigoration of how they're building their business now. I almost feel like people are usually exhausted. They're like, oh, I got to do this because it's a part of it. And I'm like, well, what if it doesn't have to be like that daunting or that just weird? Like, it's so weird and awkward. Networking is just this weird thing that people are like, oh, I just have to do it. I'm like, well, it shouldn't be that way.
How do you take it though for people that might feel like socially awkward? Like how would you help them?
So I love working with people who are introverts, because they're always like, well, I can't network because I'm an introvert. And I was like,
Huh.
well, yeah, I get your point, but why don't you just do it in smaller circles? Why don't you just make sure you're surrounded by the right types of people? Like if introverts are networking with other introverts, it always works out
Right.
because you feel better knowing that someone else has having a hard time too. And I think, those people usually do better in one-on-one type sessions as well. But if you're getting in front of the wrong people every single time, it's still harder. And you can still teach an introvert how to run an agenda. Like here's how to run a meeting every time to make sure you're still advocating for yourself and you're still advocating for that person. And it's not going to feel awkward or weird. And I think even for extroverted people, meetings are so awkward and weird because we don't know what to say. We're like, oh, I've got to be on. I got to talk about my business. And I'm like, well, why though?
So what should you say?
What would you say at a barbecue?
Just be a normal human.
Yeah, yeah, exactly. It's so funny. Like we talk all the time about networking is so hard. I'm like, but it's not though. Like people network already very well.
You
they
think
do it
people
like
just get like stuck in their heads when it comes to talking business and they become like
yeah.
unnatural and awkward?
Well, I mean, think about it. Once we put our professional hats on, we're going based off of our training. We're going based on what someone else told us we have to do because the end goal is what? A sale.
Hmm.
So when you go to a barbecue, there's no end result. There's no goal.
Mm.
It's just, I'm just going to have a good time. And, I'm not saying you should be totally, hands off in your business and be like, well, whatever happens, happens. But I think you could still go and have a goal, but not the goal always be to close a sale, because you might be closing people that have no business being a client. And I think that's a huge mistake, as well. People assume networking is going to directly correlate to a client.
Hmm.
And I'm like, well, that's why you hate networking, because you're getting a lot of no's and you're
Right.
getting a lot of pushback and you're getting a lot of confrontation. But if you approach it and say, hey, I want to build this together, I want to add people like you, so I have more resources and more tools in my tool belt for not only myself, but for my clients, then, us working together, you never know who's going to be a client at
Hmm.
the end of the day. You don't know who's going to say yes to you. But if you're being authentic and straightforward and matter of fact about what you do, not saying, well, if you work with me, all these amazing things will happen. And I'm like, why do we all talk like we're infomercials? Like, I don't understand. Like, do you need 3 payments of $9.99 for us to be like connected? Because I feel like that's what's going to happen here.
Right.
And that's not authentic. That's very salesy. That's very, the icky feeling that people get when they have those conversations. So if we just came forward and, we know our value, we know what we're good at, we know what we're not good at, even if it's hard to put that forward, and just be like, hey, yeah, this is what I do, this is why I like doing it, this is how I help people, and not assume that every single person they're going to say that to is going to take a bite of that.
Hmm. I like showing up with like the right intention. So when you show up to a networking event, what should you have in your mind is like my intention for this, like the purpose for doing this is.
Yeah, so the purpose of going to an event, obviously it's, it's going to be slightly different for everybody, but the purpose shouldn't be to go to find a direct client. The purpose
Hmm.
should be to find people that you're going to be able to collaborate with,
Hmm.
so that you're going to add to your tribe, essentially, and that we can help each other grow. That's what your goal should be. I want to find some people who think similarly to me.
Hmm.
And I would even go like with questions that people wouldn't normally hear at a networking event. Like, people always say, oh, what do you do? Which, by the way, I can't stand. Like, please stop asking me what it is that I do. How about another question? Asking people like, hey, who are you looking to meet here? Is this the first time at this type of event? What brought you here? What are you hoping to learn or accomplish at this event? And I can tell you that's going to lead to a completely different conversation, because people aren't asking those questions. So you can be completely different and ask still, very basic professional questions, or you can go completely out of left field and be like, oh, you're standing here by yourself, you look lonely. Maybe if we stand here together, we won't be so lonely, right? And
That
it's
would be me. I'm like the awkward one in the corner, and I'm like, I need to find someone to talk to.
right. And you know what? And I'm an extrovert, and I remember like going to events, like, and I stick out like a sore thumb. So my hair is purple. I'm 5'11" with no heels on. So I'm
I'm
like,
6'1".
okay,
Heyo.
so you understand, like, we're giants in the room, and people always look at your feet first. They're like, you must be wearing heels. I'm like, well, not necessarily.
Nope.
And, stick out like a sore thumb. And, guys you either get the guys that are super short that are like, I'm going to go after that, or the guys that are like completely intimidated and they're like, not touching that. And then you get people who are like, I'm going to go after everybody because everybody's a sale. And
Uh-huh.
I'm like, this is so challenging. And, I don't know if you play basketball in school, but I'm like, do I need to box people out to get into those little circles? Or do
Yes.
I have some like weird joke to like break the ice? And it's hard. You almost have to like stand in the corner and like, okay, I got this. I got to ramp myself up. I got to do this. And I'm like, why? Like, why does it have to be that awkward and so weird? Like, I shouldn't have to psych myself up to go have a conversation with somebody because I'm so worried about this preconceived notion of what they think I do, or because of the way that I look, or because of what industry that I'm in or whatever, they're not going to want to talk to me. So that, I think, is something that a lot of people feel, introverts especially, because, they feel it more than someone else. It's harder for them to just, approach somebody and have a conversation. And you can't just say, well, just get over it, right? You can't just randomly, okay, I'm going to turn it on and just start doing it. And I think if more people were more welcoming and open to, hey, I want to talk with other people, I want to meet new people, I want to expand my circle, I want to learn about other people, I want to continue bettering myself by surrounding myself with other fantastic people that I wouldn't have otherwise met. That's the purpose of an event. And I think if more people did that, it wouldn't be awkward.
For
It would
sure.
eliminate that type of, exclusiveness. Like, you're excluding a lot of people because they don't feel comfortable.
Yeah.
And people click up because they're like, oh, I know you. I'm just going to talk with people I know. And I'm like, well, why are you at an event then?
Right.
Right, what's
So
the purpose of doing that?
for sure. So I don't see events happening as often or as frequently given the current situation of the world. How are we networking online right now? How do we do like the same effect of building our network in an online?
So my events didn't stop. So I
Okay.
continued doing all my events, just went virtual. And
Okay, cool.
my in-person events were 100% participation, and so were my online events. So I would say finding an event that has active participation. So mine is really like, you got to pay attention because you might get called on.
Right.
And you're asking other people questions. You're asking them like, hey, what's something that you're known for? What do you want to be when you grew up? Like, just, if other things outside of, what's your 30-second elevator pitch?
Hmm.
And I found that running events like that, both in person and virtual, is you learn a lot more about someone, and people often relax a little bit too. Like, they can have freer flowing conversations. And what's interesting is when people are more relaxed, they're more willing to take a risk in having a conversation with somebody else.
Hmm.
So people are connecting automatically on LinkedIn. They're talking on the chats, through whatever, platform that we happen to be using. I always use Zoom, but some other people use other platforms. And that's awesome. I think it's great. There's no reason why, just because we're all home, that you can't still network. If anything, it should be the other way. You should be doing it more, and really getting yourself out there, from a digital perspective, really being up on your social media, having really good content going out, and making sure that you're constantly interacting with people in ways that, you weren't necessarily doing before, prior to pandemic, but you have no reason not to now.
For sure. What are some of your favorite platforms to network on?
So LinkedIn is probably my go-to for social media, but I use Zoom for like all my meetings and all my events. And then I use Evite and Eventbrite to get my events out there and built. Those are pretty much the only ones that I've really latched onto. And then I use Grapevine 6, which is a scheduling tool for social media, so I can get things out. Like, I have stuff that goes out on a regular basis, and then I have other content that I can build for. Sometimes I go out 6 to 8 weeks of just regular stuff, and then stuff I post on top of that is just added bonus at that point. But consistency is key.
What are some ways that you're using LinkedIn to build your network?
So I'm always like, how do I separate myself from everybody else, outside of, things I say or do, right? Like, you have to keep a consistent profile and brand to keep building that. So I use social media to really talk about other people. So connecting people on a regular basis. Like, I can't call myself any sort of networking savant if I'm not actually doing it.
Mm-hmm.
So I need to show people, like, listen, here's the power of connections. Here's the power of, that networking and taking it to that next level. Tuesdays I do a connection train. Every Monday I do a roundtable. So we have like very heart-to-heart discussions about a business, like, what's your customer service profile? How are you branding? How are you spending time? How are you getting the fight or flight type concept out, of your business? Is your head in the sand? Just looking at all, the good, bad, and the ugly of that stuff. I do happy hours every Friday. I started doing a shout out. So purposely having people talk about other people. I'm like, I don't want to hear about you. I want to hear about somebody you had a good experience with, that helped you with something you were working on, that you met, that you were blown away by, that did something for someone else. Like, I want you to talk about those people.
I
So
love that idea.
it's so amazing. And honestly, like, it's catching on. Like, I have people that are using my connection train now. And I've been doing this since quarantine started back in March, all this stuff. So it's now people are starting to replicate it. And I see people connecting people digitally, like through shout outs. Like I shout out all my meetings that I've had in usually chunks, and then I'll tag a bunch of people and say, hey, you all need to meet each other and co-collaborate in some way or another. And it's great because it's filling people's calendars and people are meeting other quality people.
How much time do you think needs to be spent networking? Because I know I'm very busy, and I know a lot of my audience is very busy. And so how much time needs to be spent doing this? And do you recommend like you need to jump on a Zoom call with people and do like a ton of private time? Because I don't have the time.
Yeah, I think it's all in what you consider networking. So for
Okay.
me, I think like the time that I put into networking is the prospecting aspect.
Okay.
So for me, I only do like a couple hours a week, and
Okay.
that is through the groups that I run. So I pretty much tell people, here's what I'm looking for. Here are the people I want to get introduced to, and they'll talk about, you know, who they've met with, and I'll say I want those introductions. That to me is my prospecting. The
Got it.
actual meetings I have, yeah, sure, we could you know, classify that as networking meetings, but I don't know. They might be networking meetings. They might be somebody that might go into my business, right? Like that might hire me, right? I don't know.
Right.
So I look at that as that's somebody that's going into a funnel. I just don't know which funnel they're going to be shooting out of.
Got it.
I look at prospecting, you know, a lot of people are like, oh, you're gonna spend 20 hours a week, or, you know, whatever the going number is these days. And I'm like, my prospecting model is teaching other people how to prospect. So I'm always front of mind as often as possible. So when it comes to like being amazing at networking, I am front of mind for that.
Right.
So when people are like, I want to network more and I want to meet more people, everyone always goes, oh, Christine Smith, like every single time.
Yeah.
So I don't need to prospect 20 hours a week to make sure that I have a constantly full funnel of meeting new people on a regular basis.
Got it. What is a synergistic influencer?
A synergistic influencer to me, or what I would call that to somebody else.
What would you call that?
So if I were to call that on somebody else, it's somebody that we really work really well. Like we put the same amount of time and effort and communication into each other. They're probably one of my top connectors. They have a really good handle on how to use social media, whether it's LinkedIn or Facebook. And they're actively working on building others up. Like I feel like there's different levels of what people think an influencer is. They're like, oh, well, they have a lot of followers. I'm like, followers mean nothing if they don't know who you are. Like you can have a huge Rolodex of people and phone numbers, but to me, that's just a list of phone numbers. That's it. If you called them, would they actually be like, oh, hey, I know who you are? Like, oh, hey, it's so good to hear from you. Because if not, to me, that's just fake. It's just like having a stack of phone books next to you, in my opinion.
Yeah.
So, you know, actually having somebody that's influenced by you and is influencing others to make some sort of change.
So you have like a huge network of people. Obviously, you know a ton of people. How do you keep track of everybody and like who they are, what they do, and everything?
So one of the things that I talk about in this particular area when I talk with people about how to be a better networker is called networking layering. So, you know, if you look at it from like a triangle perspective, not everybody's at the top, right? And there's a reason for that, right? Like you don't always have the same, you know, outlook, same types of clients that you work with. It doesn't matter locationally, like location really doesn't matter because we can kind of communicate all the time now. So the people that I keep track of the most are the ones that are constantly crossing my path. So they put the same amount of time, effort, and communication that I put into them. So they're constantly tagging me and stuff. They're inviting me to events. They're reaching out to me to schedule another meeting, to check in. They're following up with me in some sort of fashion. I'm following up with them in some sort of fashion. They're actively participating in the things that I'm doing, my events. They're in my groups. Like that's my priority. Those people become my priority because you're active in my life. It's so different than like, you know, we have different layers of friends, right? Like some friends you talk to once a year and it's kind of like you picked up where you left off, right? It's fine. But then there's some people you talk to almost every single day. Like you don't put the same amount of effort into each of those people because they're not putting the same amount of effort into you.
Right.
And, you know, even if I had, you know, 200,000 connections, the same method would still apply. Your top people that you're going to keep track of is probably going to be like 15% of your total contact list, if that. You're going to have like your top 30, 40, 50 people. And everyone else is going to trickle down from there, and the amount of time and effort that you're going to put into them, and they're going to put into you.
It's like the Pareto Law. You familiar with that? The 80/20
Is that,
law?
yeah,
Uh-huh. So like 20% of the people basically account for 80% of the results that you get.
right, right.
Interesting. Okay. What's a mistake that you see people make when it comes to networking?
Well, there's a lot, but I would say assumption is a big one. So, and what I mean by that is people assume networking is for just to find clients. Like if you ask somebody, they might say, oh, it's to find new connections, but I'm like, but why though? Like, why are you doing that? And then they're like, oh, because I need to add to my network. I'm like, no. I'm like, yes, sure, that's, surface level, that's what you're supposed to be doing, but that's not the reason that you're supposed to network. So I think people don't look at people as a multitude of opportunities. They only look at them typically as one thing, and that's a sale, a means to an end. That's it. They're just a number, right? They're not looking past what that person has to offer, what skills they have, what experience that person has. They're just looking at them as a one-sided thing, and people are not. People are multifaceted, multidimensional, right? And if you look at that person as that, not only do they feel that, they're like, oh, wow, you didn't just look at me as a piece of meat.
Yeah.
You looked at me as like, I could bring value to the conversation and to your network, and I can bring my ideas, and there's this sharing thing that happens. So if, more people change their perspective on each individual person that they met with, that, the goal can still be the same. I need to figure out how this person fits into my life. That should be your only goal. Which funnel you put them in after, that's something you would do after that meeting is done. And they might be a client, that's fine, right? Or they might be a client 6 months from now, and that's fine too. But maybe they'll never be a client, but that doesn't mean that they're not going to be a valuable piece to your life.
Right.
And people are very dismissive of people because of the industry that they're in. They think they're a competitor. And I put that loosely because I think competition is just for sports. And they, they're so focused on this one thing, they're missing out on a lot of potential opportunities. And that scarcity mindset, unfortunately, just causes that tunnel vision, that fog. And I'm like, if you were open, you have no idea what possibilities of people you could meet that you never would have otherwise considered because you made an assumption.
Right. So let's say we're networking, we're meeting a lot of people. I'm just wondering in my head how I would keep track of people to like follow up with them intentionally with how much I already have going on in my life. So how do you like keep track of people and make sure you're intentional about staying in contact with them and following up with them?
So this is where, like, when I have meetings with people and I'm like, hey, I want to make sure that we keep in touch. And we're always like, yeah, sure, we'll keep in touch, right?
Right.
And I'm like, okay, well, if we don't put it on the calendar, like, it won't happen. So
Right.
usually what I try and do is actually have like a call scheduled on the calendar. Or if you have an Android, you can actually schedule text messages, and you can do the same with iPhone with an app called, I think it's called Scheduled. So this is something I used to do all the time when I would network in person at events. So people typically ask for a business card, right? I don't use a business card. I haven't used a business card in years. I think business cards are...
That's okay. That's something too. I see like entrepreneurs all think they need a business card like as they start their business. And I'm like, I don't think I ever had one until like I was speaking at an event. And even then I got some and I barely even used them. I'm like, just add me on Facebook.
No, I don't. So I actually, what I did instead is I have myself as a contact in my phone, and it has all of my information. It has my picture, my LinkedIn, my business website, all that stuff. So what I do is you share it via text file,
Oh,
and you
so
send it to
smart.
them via text message. So then I save their number in my phone, right? And then as soon as they click on that and add me, they have me saved, which you try and get them to do that right there at that event, right?
Right.
And then I can actually schedule a text message. Usually do it right there. Oh, so nice meeting you at said event. I'd love to get together and chat more. Do you have X time or this time available? And schedule it out. So when I leave the event, yeah, sure, I might have some business cards, but I sent text messages and already pre-scheduled the conversation to get on the calendar for somebody. So this same,
Brilliant.
it's so amazing. And
That's
honestly, like
brilliant.
it's awesome too when you get a response like a couple days later and you're like, who is that? I'm like,
You
who
know
is
what
that?
I
I'm
would
like,
what I would
oh,
okay, so I love this idea. What I would probably do is like see if I could take a picture of the person or something to put them in as the contact because
yep,
otherwise if
yeah.
you are meeting a lot of people, I would totally forget them.
And that's the thing, like I I definitely am a procrastinator. I am somebody that definitely forgets, but I've gotten a lot better at just doing things and getting it off my plate as quickly as possible so that like I'm not responsible anymore for
Yeah.
anything. Like I can go home and be like, yep, I'm done,
Yep.
or whatever, or just be done with my day. And keeping track of people is hard, right? Like if something always falls through the cracks, like I don't care what CRM you use, like a CRM is definitely helpful, but it only works if you use it all the time, if you put the
Right.
notes in, if you schedule the task, like if you do all that stuff. I know like just scheduling the meeting has always helped. Sometimes I will schedule a task. So like Google Calendar has like a task feature where you can schedule stuff and it will show up. Like you can say, oh, I gotta call this person or this person. But I'll just do it as an event too, to be honest with you. I'll have like an event and I'll schedule it all. I'll be like, all right, every Monday, here's my stuff for the week. And then the thing is too, like people come up. It's almost like there's like a serendipitous way sometimes where you talked with somebody 6 months ago and you both forgot like to reach out to each other, because it always happens, right? And then all of a sudden they show up on your LinkedIn page for something that they were doing and like, oh my God, it's been a while, we should reconnect.
Yeah.
And I look at it as that's still your 15-20% circle, right? Like that number, some people move in and move out, but you have people, there's always that 6 degree of separation. So I feel like with that, your core people help kind of keep everyone else in the loop on what you guys are each doing, and helping each other to remind like, oh hey, we gotta reconnect with those people. And that's also where like drip campaigns can come in. And if you're using a CRM, you could do it that way too. There's no perfect solution, like we're all human, unfortunately, so that adds to that. And if you're not just a business owner but you're a parent and you have a house and you have another business, right? Like there's that added thing, we don't have time, right? But I think other people make time too, right? It's
Sure.
not just, oh hey, it all falls on me. It doesn't
For
all just
sure.
fall on us.
What's one of the biggest mistakes you've made or lessons that you've learned in growing your business?
I would say it was the assumption thing. That's something that I used. That was what I was taught to do when I started in my business was, you know, in short, assume everybody's a client.
Yeah.
That's a terrible move because everyone smells it. They
Yeah.
all know, and especially out of desperation, like you can tell when somebody's like they're
I need a
desperate for it.
client today.
Yeah, yeah, and it just doesn't bode well. And I think some of that is like you have the scarcity and lack of confidence. You're not really
Uh-huh.
secure with what you're doing yet, right? That all kind of mushes in, and it just doesn't work out. But I think if it was taught that, hey, perspective, you don't know what opportunity person this is going to be, which level they're going to sit at, everyone is an opportunity. I think that would completely change how people have conversations. And I honestly think people would actually close more sales, because if you are not being sought after, people like to be sought after, people like to be chased.
Yeah.
And when you're like, wait a second, you're offering this amazing thing and you didn't even offer it to me, well, what, like, I want it now. I want to buy it now. And it was something that I learned when I was in the car business, and I was like, oh, I'm going to bring that back. When you take it away from people and you don't offer it directly to them, you're like, oh, well, if you know anybody that has this, and this category, and they're like, well, you just described me. And I was like, oh, okay. You think that this would be something that would help you? And they're like, yeah, I want to come in. And I'm like, okay, yeah, I did that on purpose. Like, I know you're going to come in, but I wish I had learned that a long time ago, because it would totally have saved me from, all these awkward moments and, weird pauses of people, and who knows, people's responses on, oh, well, they're just trying to sell me something. And that's the worst feeling in the world, when somebody says that about you, or whether it's to your face or somebody else, and you hear about it and you're like, oof, yeah, don't want that.
For sure. What's one of the best books you've read?
Um, The one that I'm reading right now, Question Behind the Question. It's a very short read. It's like an hour and a half on Audible. It's like super short. What's interesting about it is just it's trying to help people with, like, I guess, the business victim mentality. So, you know, problems in a business or why something's happening is like, well, it's their problem, rather than being like, well, you know, here's the situation. You know, just being more matter of fact and being more direct with people. And I love that because I teach that in networking all the time. I'm like, we all have been learned and taught to beat around the bush to try and sell somebody. But I'm like, why though? The things that everybody offers, I don't care what it is that you offer, is valuable to somebody.
Yep.
There's no reason why you can't own it and say, I sell XYZ service. I sell XYZ product. Here are the types of clients I like to work with. Here are the types of problems that we solve. But that's not what's being taught. No, you can't say it that way. You can't be that. You can't, you know, you have to tell them and work them into it. Now I work for this amazing company and we do this, this, and this. And it's like, so what is it that you do? Like, and then people are already questioning you. And then they're like, oh, well, this seems sketchy. And now red flags are going up. And I'm like, why? That's so much time that you just wasted.
Yep.
And I love like just the directness, like the book is, you know, describing situations and scenarios. And I'm like, this reminds me of a lot of things I've been through in my life. And I'm like, I wish I read this like 5 years ago.
Yeah. Better late than never.
Yeah, better late than never. Right. But it was kind of like validation also for like what I was already doing. And, you know, I'm like, I've already been doing the more direct route. I've been doing that for probably the last 3 years. And it was just cool to hear that perspective again and just, you know, hey, here's another way to say that. I'm like, great. I'll definitely probably use that another way.
Nice. What does it mean to you to make an impact?
People are happy with what they're doing. Like being able to leave an impact in the networking realm to me means like people are excited about what they're offering and can confidently talk about it and not feel less because they're a salesperson.
I like it. Where can we connect with you?
LinkedIn.
Just Christine Smith on LinkedIn.
Yep, Christine Smith. I'm the girl with purple hair on LinkedIn. So
Makes you memorable.
Yes, it is. And I feel like I can't get rid of it. I can't like not have purple hair now because like everyone's like, oh yeah, she's the one with purple hair.
There you go.
Like if I get rid of it, people are like, wait, who's that?
So cool. Christine, you're doing amazing things. Thank you so much for being on the podcast. I really appreciate you.
Yeah, thanks so much for having me.